Direct flash and shutter drags. This is one of my favorite techniques to use, especially say on a dance floor at a wedding or at an event. Anytime you want to capture motion and show action and then freeze the subject at the end of it, this is a perfect technique. So you can use it really anywhere. And in fact, I'm going to show you some really weird places that we've actually used this technique to get a really fun shot. The whole point of this technique is to create a shot that has imperfections. It shows motion, it shows all these types of things, and it adds a lot of interest to this image. Now, there's a few different tips that I want to go through, and probably the first one, which actually I forgot to list over here on the left, the first one is to make sure that the bright light, the primary light in the scene is actually coming from behind the subject. So if you're on the dance floor and there's a lot of dance floor lights, whether you're at a concert, whether you're at an event, whatever you're at, move into position where those dance floor lights are behind your subjects. If they're in front of your subjects, what ends up happening is you don't end up freezing them as well because there's a lot of ambient light on their faces. You want that ambient light coming from behind because it'll look cool from behind, but not as much so from the front. Now, primary tip number one is to dial in your shutter speed based on the scene and based on the speed of the action. For the dance floor, I would say typically around 1/10 to 1/5 of a second is around ideal. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and do that right now. So I'm gonna dial it into 1/10. Next, adjust your aperture and ISO to arrive at the ambient light exposure. Now here's what I mean. Turn off your flash, and what I'm gonna do is just take a shot. Take a shot of the room and kind of, do the same kind of motion that you would if this were an actual shot, actual motion shot. Now, right now, I just end up with this super bright image, and I actually don't have a card-in camera right now. Let me take this shot again. So this is too bright. So all I'm gonna do is just adjust my aperture to f2, and I'm gonna adjust my exposure to say ISO maybe around 400, okay? Just so I get a nice bit of motion in the shot. And I might even take it a little bit lower than that. Go to around ISO 200. Around anywhere between, if I'm at f2 or f2.8, usually my ISO is between 100 to 400. Okay, that typically gives me a good amount of light in the background for a dance floor. So what I want is just to get some motion in the background, but I don't want it to be so bright and overexposed. At that point, all I'm gonna do is turn on my flash, point it directly at my subject. I still have my ring flash thingy on, so let me take this guy off. That way I can get this to point actually directly at my subjects. All right, so I'm gonna point this directly down, power it on, and I'm gonna shoot in TTL. Remember, if I'm using bare bulb flash and I'm going directly at the subject, this will work actually really nicely, and it's gonna be very light power anyway, so I'm not too worried about recycle times and whatnot. I'm just gonna point this directly at my subject. I can control my zoom again if I wanna pin light one person or if I wanna get a group of individuals. So usually I actually like to use my zoom to around 80 to 105 millimeters because I like that one individual that I'm focused on to kind of be brighter than everybody else. Okay, so I'm gonna go at 80 millimeters. Just remember, turn on rear curtain sync. Remember, we're doing a shutter drag, so you wanna have rear curtain sync on. And at this point, all you're gonna do is start firing away and adding action to the shot, okay? So that's how we would create it, and the flash is gonna end up freezing the person, and then the motion from the shutter drag will end up capturing the motion in the background. So the other tips are to shoot a lot of images to make sure that you're getting good expressions and good, shots of people and so forth. And then number 6 is to, well, in this shot, we didn't have a lot of stuff going on behind us. So rather than just have her go and just dance alone, we actually used a fan to kind of blow the hair around. But if you're in a group of people, obviously if you're at a wedding, you're not gonna take a leaf blower onto the dance floor and be like on everybody. That doesn't make sense. And plus, usually on the dance floor at a wedding or at an event, everybody's going crazy anyway. It's not one person against a backdrop. So when you're shooting, I'm gonna show you guys a couple tips on motion and stuff like that, but let's go through these shots real quick and just talk through how each of these shots are created. So this very first shot, this was basically to test our ambient exposure. So what this is on a 100 millimeter lens, this is at 1/5 of a second at f4 and ISO 100 with no flash. This is that ambient exposure. This is that same ambient exposure at 1/5 f4 ISO 100 with direct flash, but we haven't added any motion to it. So now it just looks kind of blurry. It doesn't look good really at all. Okay, and then with our motion, we get this third shot. So this third shot is 1/5 of a second, f4 ISO 100, direct flash TTL, but what we said was the motion was bad. It didn't work. Now that's not because, it's not because we did anything wrong, it's just because for this particular shot, the lights end up traveling over the face and whatnot. And so the motion in that shot is not good. You're gonna get shots where the motion isn't good, where the expression isn't good, where there's something wrong. So we say shoot a bunch. You're gonna shoot kind of high speed when you're doing this type of stuff. But we just keep shooting and then we get to this. So what I'm trying to do, once I noticed that the lights were directly behind her face and they were trailing across her face, I just got up a little bit higher. And I put the lights in the background below her body. So when I travel back and forth now, they don't conceal the face. We get tons of great expressions. Generally, you just want the lights either above or below the face, so that way they're not going across and creating blurs and blocking out. They don't have to be looking in the camera. For these particular shots, once we got this set up, we had a bunch of people in the studio. They're like, I want to do some of the dance floor shots. I never get a chance at weddings to do that. So Jackie, our studio manager, came in. We got this shot with her. We were out at the end of a shoot, and it was really funny. I was like, let's get your dance moves on. We're actually in the middle of a parking lot. We just did the exact same thing in a parking lot. This is Olivia. And I'm like, dance, because we just finished another shoot. And she just starts dancing with no music, mind you. Kind of weird, actually. And I start twisting the camera and moving and creating the motion, and we get this shot. We posted this online. We're like, celebrate because we just finished our last shoot for Lighting 101 outdoors. And people were like, that's amazing. How did you do that shot? And we're like, dude, this is the dance floor setup. We're going to show you the dance floor setup, but this was actually in a parking lot. So you can make a parking lot look like a dance floor. Pretty cool. All right, so let me show you some of the motions that I like to use when I'm doing a twist or when I'm adding motion, particularly when I'm shooting like events and that kind of stuff. One is the twist. So the twist is basically where you're firing, you keep the subject right in the center. And what I'll do is I'll just focus on the subject, and then I generally keep the subject right in the center for these type of shots. And once I get the subject in focus, I simply twist while firing. Okay? Now, you can see how quickly we're kind of moving and twisting and firing and stuff like that. When you're doing this on a dance floor, like say at an event, people are kind of surprised by it because they're like, whoa, he's shooting tons of cool images. So what I like to do is shoot that and then show a group of people and be like, look how awesome this looks. And they see these kind of shots and like, that's wicked awesome. Like I had no idea you were doing that. And it's one of those wow type effects. Another great motion. So this motion right here, this is side to side, okay? So once I get a focus on her, I simply go from side to side, okay? The slower the shutter speed, well, the more motion you're gonna pick up. The faster the shutter speed, the less motion you're gonna pick up. So if your shutter speed's at 1/10 of a second, you gotta move a little bit quicker. So if I'm at 1/10 like I am right now, then to capture motion, I really need to be doing this, okay? To be able to get enough motion in that shot. But if I slow it down to 1/5, then, well, I'm gonna go to 1/5 and then I can kind of go more slow with each of these. So depending on the speed of the shutter is what's going to dictate how quickly you're moving the camera. Another one of my favorites, we get like a wavy look right here, and we actually nailed a lot of these images that look great. The wavy look is like this. So what we're doing is we focus and then we go up and down in a wave. Okay? Any motion you want is fantastic. If you have a zoom lens, you can sit there and zoom in and out while you're doing that same type of shot, and you'll get a zoom pan type effect, which looks great as well. Just play around with this. Remember to kind of look at each shot and see how the lights behind the subjects are moving, and keep trying it until you get these amazingly creative shots that'll just blow people's minds. And when you do, post them to SR Lounge so we can see them as well. That's it for this video. One quick mention as far as processing goes. With these types of shots, you're gonna have lots of color. You're gonna have lots of things going on. One thing that really helps out is just doing a slight matte approach to the processing inside of Lightroom, just with the tone curve. That way it kind of reduces the direct flash look and kind of just evens it out a little bit. Leave the colors and leave those kind of things. Sometimes I'll desaturate just a tiny, tiny bit because they end up being really rich. But that's it. It's very simple to process, very simple to get cool and creative shots using the shutter drag plus flash freeze technique.